Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brent Coker from the University of Melbourne. And today I'm going to be talking about viral marketing, essentially. So this is a subject that I've been researching for the last 10 years or so now. I come from the University of Melbourne. I'm an academic there. Now, virology is the name of a doco masterclass that was produced earlier on this year, which is available for free to watch on Vimeo and my website if you want to explore more about this topic. But today I'm going to look at a few elements of viral marketing that's specifically relevant for conference and events. So when we think about viral marketing, what we essentially mean is word of mouth. You know, what causes consumers to tell other consumers great things about your brand. So I want to start by sharing just a little story about how we got there. So, you know, when we measure how viral something is, we actually measure how many shares it has, not how many likes it has. That's a more accurate metric. And so this, you know, way back, I think it was 2011, I remember getting a call one night as I was preparing to teach a class. And it was a woman who told me that she was from a small boutique advertising agency in Sydney, and she was very panicked because she'd just taken on a new client that wanted to release a new underwear brand into the Australian market. And she had promised that she could make them something that would go viral online. The problem, of course, was that it wasn't going viral, and she wanted to ask me if there was anything that she could do to fix it. Now, I didn't have the heart to tell her that, you know, once these things are out there, you can't fix them. They're either going to go viral from the start or they're not. And but anyway, I set my things aside and told her that I would at least have a look. And it became immediately apparent to me what she had done wrong. So we have to make a distinction between controversy or marketing content that's designed to capture people's attention and content that's designed to be shared. They're different. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. What makes content shareable? So I'm going to be talking about emotions, how to use emotions the right way. I'm going to be talking about something called affinity, which is the first step after you've identified who your target audience is. Something called self-enhancement, which is ingrained in all content. It's a psychological motive that motivates consumers to want to share things. And then I'm going to end by looking at a couple of techniques in particular that I think is relevant for event marketing. And one of them is a little left field, actually. I'm going to talk about scent and the role of smell. That's very highly underused by marketers, so I'm going to end on that. So let me begin. So anyway, getting back to my story, I had a look at her viral video that wasn't moving anywhere, and I immediately understood what she was trying to do. She was trying to copy some of the bigger brands like Calvin Klein and so on that had billboard posters of semi-naked people strewn around the streets and so on. So it was a movie video where you took a photo of your face and your face ended up being in the story. And it was a woman dressed in lingerie walking around a dimly lit apartment. She picked up a magazine. She opened the magazine to a centerfold. The camera zoomed in and, oh, lo and behold, it was me. They'd superimposed my face on this body that was, you know, wearing the underwear. And then things got a little steamy after that. Now, I can tell you immediately why that hadn't gone viral. It wasn't shareable. So that's the first thing that we care about when we're producing viral marketing campaigns is starting with the premise, how do we make something shareable? Okay, now I promise I don't have many statistics in this presentation. In fact, this is the only one, and you've probably seen this one before. But look, 78% of consumers trust peer recommendations nowadays, and only 14% trust advertisements. This is just one of several studies. There's a whole bunch of studies I've seen that have produced similar results. It's essentially the 80-20 rule. The point is, the best marketing that there is, the one that we care about most nowadays, is how to create content that's shareable, that consumers are going to tell other consumers about. So that's what today's presentation is about. So when we start with viral marketing campaigns, we start by looking at, okay, how can we motivate consumers to want to share the content? The second thing we look at is how do we eliminate reasons for them to not share the content? Now, the example I gave you of the woman in Sydney was a great example of how to put stuff in there that's going to disincentivize people to want to share it. I mean, you know, sharing sexual kind of stuff through social media, people do not do that. So we don't even go there anymore. That sex sells marketing mantra is not relevant nowadays. And finally, we look at how to evaluate the motives to share, which we'll also touch on. Right, so let me start by posing a question here. What does winning a prize and having a near miss with a car have in common? And I can say the answer is not, neither of them really happen that often. That's technically correct, but there's another reason. The answer to this question is that both of them make you want to tell others about it. You think about it. When you've won a prize, what do? You tell all your friends, right? You're sitting in the pub, you call your girlfriend, your partner, your mum, you tell your dog, I just won a prize, I'm so happy. The other one, you have a near miss with a car, of course. That crazy guy today, I almost got knocked off my bike riding down Sydney Road. The thing is that these both evoke strong emotions, right? So this is one of the most heavily researched area of modern marketing nowadays is emotions cause people to want to tell others about their experience. So that's where it starts. So that's the most important part about viral marketing. And a little bit more science here. Here is the wheel of emotions. Here are all the possible emotions that there are, and we pick and choose some of these emotions. Now, one thing to note about emotions, which we'll come back to, is that there are two valences of emotions, as we say. There's positive emotions, joy and so on, and negative emotions like fear and anger and so on. That's important to know. And there's also different strengths of emotions. Now, where things get interesting and how to use emotions properly is mixing emotions. So this model here is done by a guy called Professor Pluchik, recognizes that if you get two different emotions, you can make new emotions. And that's important for modern marketing, and that's been a focus of our research in recent times. So, a lot of research has been looking at the roles of emotions, and emotions cause sharing. And then we started to look at, okay, well, emotions cause people to share, but why? What's in the middle there? And it's this thing called arousal, which is a psychological term we use in psychology a lot. So that's actually key. So emotions is one way to create arousal, but it's actually the arousal that's important. So there are many different ways to create arousal. So you can bypass emotions altogether, but by using emotions is the easiest way to create arousal that ultimately causes sharing. So this is the model that causes people to share information. It's word of mouth, the word of mouth model. So what's this arousal? Well, arousal starts at zero. It's on a continuum. Zero arousal is somebody who's in a coma, essentially. And at the other end of the spectrum, somebody who's manic, that's high arousal. Now, what we know is that the higher the arousal, or the stronger the arousal, the more sharing happens. And we've done a whole bunch of studies on this, looking at, okay, well, this viral movie here, it's a super viral. A super viral is one that has over 1 million shares. Is highly, highly shareable, and because it creates a high arousal effect. So we'll look at how you do that then. How do you create, it's easy to insert emotions into all types of marketing content, but how do you ensure that the arousal that comes out of it is strong enough? And that's the key. So let me give you a couple of quick examples here. Now, have you ever lost your wallet, right? So think about that time, or your phone. Okay, let me use the phone example because a lot of people care about their phones. And there's a trend nowadays to put your phone in your back pocket, let's say. Now you tap your back pocket and you go, oh my God, my phone's gone. Now the next thing you might do is pat your other pockets and to look for it and you go, oh, it was just in a different pocket. Now what happens then is you go from a feeling of fear, that emotion, to a feeling of joy and relief that, oh my God, I've just found it. And your face might start to blush even. Well, that's arousal. So, and likely you'll tell somebody who's standing next to you, So the point is taking people from one extreme of emotion to the other extreme is the key to maximizing the effectiveness of emotion. So we'll look at a couple of examples of how you can do that in marketing specifically. Before I do that, I just want to give one more example here. Let's say you're sitting at a roulette table, you've got a $20 chip, and let's say, you got $1,000 in the bank, but it's your last chip for the night. You're going to gamble it and put it on the red, And if it wins, you go from a state of perhaps indifference, great, you know, I'm gambling, my last chip, and then maybe you win, and then you're happy, right? But it's not something that you tell others about around the dinner table, really, you know. But let's frame it another way. Let's say that that's your last $20 in the world, and you know that if you lose this bet, you're likely going to go hungry tonight, and worse, you're going to be sleeping on the street. Now you're going from a state of fear, and then you win, to a state of joy. Now that is maximizing the arousal effect by going from one extreme of emotions to another. So you cross the boundaries of negative valence to positive valence. And that's the key. And now that's a talkable, you know, that's a shareable story that potentially you could talk about around the dinner table. I had my last $20 and I won. Okay. So that's the effect that we try to create in modern marketing to create word of mouth nowadays. So here's one example I came across which I think is relevant even for event marketing. Now Snapple, they had 33 million media impressions from this little stunt that they did. But they were using emotions in a very clever way. So it's rare, actually, to find brands that know how to do this properly, but Snapple is one that does it very well, Nestle. So what it was, they're releasing a new white tea brand, and the slogan was the lightest tasting teas on earth. So they wanted to affect people emotionally. I've seen this done by Kia cars using slides and so on. So other brands have done this as well. But they had helium-filled balloons, and they strapped people in, and they lift you up, and then, you know, 20 meters or whatever it is, and then let you back down. Now, that's taking people from a state of fear or anxiety to a state of elation and joy of, wow, this is actually pretty cool, and then they get back down, and then you get a free sample drink. You know, so that's affecting people emotionally, and that's the kind of thing that's really powerful in marketing. So if you can figure out a way to affect people emotionally, that's what creates word of mouth. And I think Snapple's a great example here. In fact, it's one of the most successful marketing campaigns in recent times. Okay, so now the other two emotions that I think are highly relevant for conference and event marketing are, now the first one is anticipation. Now there's something about stories. When people can't have to, now in clinical psychology, when people experience trauma, for example, we get them to tell the story because they can't close the story. They ruminate, as we say. So let me paint a picture or example here. Let's say you're lying in bed at night, you hear a noise somewhere in the house. Chances are you can't sleep until you get up out of your bed and go investigate what that noise was. That's human nature. People have to close the story, and that's how you create anticipation. The secret is giving enough information that gets people curious, but not too much information so that they can guess what's going to come ahead. It's like somebody telling a joke. You know, when somebody's going to tell a joke and you can guess what the punchline is, it's not funny, right? So, you know, so creating something that intrigues people, but they can't guess what's coming up next. So it's all about how you deliver information beforehand. It's very powerful. That'll get a lot of people talking for all sorts of events. Now, here's a big one. Now, obviously, I realize that you don't have $1 billion marketing budget so that you can do a Felix Baumgartner supersonic free fall from 120,000 kilometers above the Earth. But let's face it, Red Bull are the masters at all types of event marketing. But it's one example, okay, at one end of the extreme of creating anticipation. So the news and the word of mouth driving this was the anticipation that people knew something was going to happen, but there were so many questions in their mind about what was going to happen. Was he going to turn into a fireball when he entered the universe, or the atmosphere? What was going to happen? You know, okay, that's one end of the extreme, perhaps not within your budget. Well, here's another one at the other extreme in terms of the amount of budget they have. This is free. Now, this is actually a prank, but I think it illustrates it nicely. So this was an art gallery event, and somebody thought it would be funny to put their glasses on the floor to see what people would do, and a lot of people ended up taking photos and thought it was part of the event, part of the show, taking photos. Now, why do people do that? Well, it gives them enough information to get them interested, but there's not full information. They don't know what's going on. There's lots of questions running through their mind of, what's this doing? You know, what's the meaning of this? And people don't quite get it. So that's one of the keys to creating intrigue and word of mouth. Creating anticipation, you can use intrigue. So intrigue, anticipation, I think they're very important and relevant for marketing, your type of marketing. Now, I often get asked this, Brent, which is better? Should I tell people why they should attend or why they shouldn't attend in that list that's on your website? Well, let me use an example. There's a very famous experiment that was done that had two butchers in a market at opposite ends of the market. One of them was advertising his mincemeat, and by the way, this was exactly the same mincemeat that they were selling. One of them was advertising his mincemeat as 90% lean. The other was advertising his mincemeat as 10% fat. Guess who sold more mincemeat? It was the 90% lean person. Now, why is this? When you look at factually, this is exactly the same information and exactly the same mincemeat. The reason is because people are risk averse. They're affected by negativity more. So what you'll find is if you write why not attend lists, they'll affect people more strongly than why attend lists. So if you always frame things in the negative sense, it has a stronger effect on people's behavior. Okay, now we're going to talk quickly about affinity. So what is affinity? Well, it's a feeling of warmth, respect, deep appreciation for an activity, idea, or an object. So essentially, it's something that people care deeply about. When you think about your cat or your dog, that's affinity. But we need to create affinity in marketing. That's the other piece of the puzzle. So the emotion's one thing, but affinity is also critically important. So it usually comes after you've identified who your target audience is. No, I don't need to tell you how to do that. You're all experts on that side of things. But once you've got to that step, before you set up your marketing, figure out what the affinity is. In other words, what does your target audience really, really care about? Now, that might sound a little vague, so let me give you some examples. Now, here's a surfing brand, of course, Billabong, up near my sister's house, actually, but I think they've moved recently up in the Gold Coast. But anyway, so this is a classic surf advertisement that they come out with, somebody surfing through the barrel of a wave. You think this stuff goes viral? It doesn't. Well, there's no affinity. People care about waves, surfers care about waves, but it's something that they do. It's not part of their value system. Let me compare that to one that was done by Quicksilver, which did go viral. It got shared a lot. Now, the caption is missing here, but this is Java, which is a famous surfing spot near Indonesia, and this is pollution in the water. Now you've really touched on something that people care about, their affinity. And that's why it went viral. So the thing is, you want to identify something that your target audience deeply cares about. I mean, they almost want to fight for it. That's what we're aiming for here. Let me give you some other examples here. A hotel in Northern California. And now, if you've ever been in Northern California, they're heavily into the environmental things. I mean, nobody smokes cigarettes. They did away with plastic bags years ago, and they care about that stuff. So Hotel Zero plays on that. So here's one example. They cut the center out of the soap to prove to everyone that we care about wastage here, and the reviews are off the scale. It's one of the most popular little hotels in the whole state, simply because of little things like this that tie into what their target audience really cares about. Here's another one. This is from my Twitter feed, actually. So now I know this is not hugely viral. I can see it's got 195 retweets, which is actually a lot for me. I mean, I teach digital marketing at University of Melbourne, but I'm not actually that great at getting a lot of retweets usually. But this time I knew it would be popular. Now, this was last year when rumours were going around that Buckingham Palace had some really important news to tell everybody. Something had happened. But they weren't going to tell everyone until the next morning when the Queen woke up. And so the world went crazy during that 5 hours when everyone was waiting. I thought, oh my God, Prince Philip's died. And now that's something that a lot of people who care about the royal family deeply care about, don't they? I mean, they cry when they have weddings and so on. I mean, and some of you are perhaps really into the royal family. I know my mother is. She talks about royals that I've never even heard of. But Here's one example of why it became so popular, because it's something that people have affinity for. Here's another example. Now, this got quite a lot of engagement for me, at least. Please don't judge me. This is my LinkedIn account. So 74 likes. Now, I knew that this would be popular because, these are the concrete blocks that they set up in our streets to stop terrorists from running people down. And Melbourne, being Melburnians, we like to decorate our city. And so some of the local people crafted covers for the concrete blocks. Now that creates affinity. People usually care a lot about their city, right? So the pattern here is it's stuff that people care about a lot. Figure out what it is, and then you can play on that. Here's another one I just threw in, is a Via rideshare in New York. So they use this as a competition. They take little photos of little parts of their city that local people might, there's just not quite enough information for people to identify where it is, but it looks familiar, that kind of feeling. And they run a competition of that. And they get a huge amount of engagement and sharing just by doing that simple little competition, very cheap to do. But again, playing on people's affinity. People usually care about their city. Okay, so oftentimes it's not easy to do. Let's say you've got delegates from all around the world and, we're not quite sure what they care about. A shortcut is to play on stuff that's on the news. We call this tip of mind, actually. So what we find is when something's already on people's mind, that means they already care about it. And stuff that's on the news, usually people care about. So Oreo are masters at social media marketing. And here's one little campaign that they did. For every day and every month, they produced one of their cookies that was crafted in a way to represent whatever was on the news that day. So June 25th was Gay Pride Day. And the first day of autumn was the next day, and then the day after that, Neil Armstrong, something about the moon landing, and then the Tour de France was in the news. So they used their product in every situation, depending what was on the news. Highly, highly shareable. That's tip of mind affinity. So that's another method that's often used in modern marketing. So I'll leave it up to you on how you can craft that for your own events. Now, the next thing I want to just cover briefly before we run out of time is this idea of self-enhancement. So I used to think that people used to share things on social media to make me jealous. But, it became apparent to me once I thought about this more often. It's actually not to make me feel jealous. It's to make them feel better through self-enhancement. So self-enhancement is a psychological thing, which I won't bother to cover in too much detail. Suffice to say that people share content to make themselves feel good. And I think here's a quick image to illustrate that. So when we study teenagers using social media, for example, we observe that they post content, and if they don't get engagement within 15 minutes, they delete that content. So, and you've probably come across this yourself. You post something online, you get 50 likes or something, and it makes you feel great, right? Well, that feeling is self-enhancement. So whatever you do, when you're creating content, think about, is this shareable? Is this going to make people want to post it to get engagement? It's going to make them feel good. So you're creating content to make your target customers feel good. Okay, now just quickly, groups. Here's one technique. So those are the basics. There's a few other things that you can, if you're interested in, you can watch my virology masterclass and dig into that a little bit deeper, or watch my or read my book even, Going Viral. But let me just touch on a couple of specific techniques here. So now there's something about human nature that makes us want to join a group and defend that group. Happens all the time. That, unfortunately, that's the reason for wars. But in general society, we tend to join groups. We join the chess club, or, well, people like me do. That's not, you join the soccer club or the, whatever clubs that you're interested in, people join those clubs. Cecilia Bliss, I don't know if you know this story. She was a Scottish bride, and her mother, Cecilia, wanted to go to the wedding. She sent a picture of her wedding dress that she was going to wear. Now, there's a culture in Scotland where nobody who's a guest at the wedding should wear a dress that's lighter than the bride. In other words, she's supposed to wear dark-coloured dresses. So she sent the dress, And here was the dress. And the bride looked at it and she freaked out because she thought, why is my mother going to wear a black and a blue dress to the wedding? A white and a gold dress to the wedding. And so her fiance came over and she said, you're crazy. That's white and gold. That's not black and blue. And that's where it started. So this is the most viral content that I think we've ever had. Just a few stats here. But before 1 week had gone, on Tumblr, this image had got 73 million views. I was getting 140,000 views per minute at that point. So hugely, hugely viral. So why? Well, what we notice in marketing, whenever you get two groups that are pairing off against each other, it creates this sort of talked about friction, which drives word of mouth. So we use that in marketing. So here's a quick example. This was an event in Madrid. It was a soccer game, actually, when I think it was like the grand final that we're about, Melbourne's grand final here. It was so Atletico de Madrid and Real Madrid playing. And so to create buzz for the event and sell more tickets, they set up a quick app. And quite a cheap app, actually. So the way that the app worked was you indicated which team you wanted to support, and then you answered questions. And whenever you answered a question correct, you won that section in your suburb. So whenever your team was answering more answers correctly than the opposition team, your suburb got conquered in a way. Very successful. Here's another one. An event done by Levi's where they had, oftentimes it's done using males and females. It's another, what we call a natural group difference, a fixed group difference. So males and females, very commonly done. I'm sure you've seen lots of speakers comparing males and females. Comedians use it as their bread and butter all the time. But using it in an event here, so they had the women and they had a big pile of jeans, and the women had to choose a pair of jeans and try to match them to some of the male models that were wearing just Levi's underwear. And hugely successful, again, a lot of engagement from that one. All right, so I'm going to rush through this fairly quick, just in the interest of time, but one technique that's really not used often, but I think could be highly relevant for event marketers, is smell. Now, the interesting thing about smell is it goes through that center part of the brain there, we call it the limbic system, which controls arousal, right? Which controls talking about it. So it's a very powerful thing, smell. Real estate agents, you may have heard about this. I know a real estate agent, he puts a loaf of bread in the oven in the morning before the open house, and he claims that he sells it for a higher price when he does that to make the house smell of bread. But here's some research some real research on this. So gamblers spend more money when there's a nice smell in the room. That's why when you go to Crown Casino, it stinks of perfume, or when you go to any casino in Vegas, they all smell like perfume. Time goes faster. It improves the valuations of people on photos, improves the friendliness and negotiation, setting higher prices, accepting concessions. So smell does funny things to people. Now, the one thing that it does that's relevant is it also improves word of mouth. But it depends what smell. So we can put smell on the arousal continuum, and we want them up there in the 10, because some smells are relaxing. We don't want those. We want the other smells that wake people up: lemon, bergamot, spearmint, juniper, berry, and birch. Those are the types of smells that have the potential to get people buzzing and create different types of behavior. And I'm wondering, I've never run an event before, but I'm wondering how relevant this could be for events. Certainly it's relevant for the retail space, and it is becoming increasingly used. Okay, so just to sum things up, we're right on time. Create content that invokes strong emotions. And the way that you can do that is by combining different emotions, taking people from a negative emotion state to a strong emotion state, a positive emotion state. Find out who your target audience is. You all know how to do that. But then find out what they truly care about, the affinity, and then use the affinity in the marketing. That'll add to the shareability of it. Think outside the box. How can you create group conflict? What types of groups exist in your target audience? Snowboarders, skiers, easy. Some other groups, much more difficult. Or have you ever thought about using scents? You know, I wonder if anybody's done that yet. It sounds interesting to me. Okay, now, as I said, I recently produced Virology, which is the masterclass, which will go into these topics and more in a lot more detail. So it's available for free on Vimeo. Please go ahead and have a look, or it's also available on my website. And thank you for listening and tuning in today. If there's any questions, I'm able to answer questions. And otherwise, thank you very much.